Thank you so much for agreeing to be our guest on the show today, Mr. Singh. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Sarah. No, glad to be here. Thank you for reaching out, giving me this opportunity to be on the podcast.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to meet you. So my first question is, what was it that inspired you to create your podcast?
So for me, part of what I kind of resonate with is giving back to society and giving back to others. It's quite like a firm pillar in our faith of Sikhism. So it's a concept of seva, which is almost a service to humanity, and that can be done in a number of ways. Typically, what we do in the Sikh faith is we feed everybody. We have 24/7 sort of food in our gurdwaras where we worship and congregate. So the aspect is really truly embedded in everything that we do. So for me, I'm a qualified accountant in my professional career. And prior to setting up the podcast, I set up an online presence to help budding accountants get through their exams, because I figured out the difficult way and thought, right, I can give this privilege back to budding accountants and help them with their exam strategy and stuff. So I always wanted to do something in the community space. So one, 2 Christmases ago, I think maybe, yeah, 2 Christmases ago, I had 2 weeks off work and I said, right, I'm going to create a podcast. And I wanted to create an avenue where people could listen to long form conversations and really learn from people and experts in their field, but also organizations that were doing something good for social change and society, especially working on key community issues in the South Asian space. So yeah, I'm a bit of a techie. I would say I'm a techie first, then a finance person. So it was much easier for me to set up the podcast and do all the stuff in the background. I was just surprised how open people were to sort of have conversations, and their willingness to sort of share. And yes, and I really enjoy it. It's a great thing I like to look forward to doing in my sort of time, really. And the more I do it, the better I get at interviewing. But yeah, kind of one person then recommends another person, and then I create this network. I can reach out to people and help people in a different way through that network as well.
That's fascinating. So in Sikhism, they've had several gurus over its existence, like Guru Nanak or Guru Gobind Singh. Are there any gurus that have influenced your faith the most, and why is that?
So I guess the context of the number of gurus, we have 10 physical human gurus, and it started off with Guru Nanak, who's the founder, and then there were subsequent 9 gurus that sort of baton was passed on to, and they kind of progressed the faith and adapting to the environments that they were facing, and sort of took that growth of the faith with each sort of passing on from the gurus. So I think the one key thing is there may be 10 gurus, but we as Sikhs see it as the same light within all of them, that they were the manifestation of one Guru, Guru Nanak, and that light traveled within 10 different beings from him going onwards. So we all, yeah, so we see that as a consistent thing, but we do have tendencies to resonate with a few gurus and their life lessons and experiences that they've gone through. And I think a really interesting fact to share about the founder of the Sikh faith was that he is the second most traveled person in the whole world. So he traveled more than, I think, 28,000 kilometers across 5 major world tours to sort of spread this message of Sikhi, which is about bringing people back to the core roots of, goodness and being honest, and doing things thoughtfully, rather than like what he experienced was that the 2 major faiths were at the time in the area, Hinduism and Islam. And he found most of, because they've been around for a long time, most of the practices were just becoming routine and became ritualistic. And as human nature is, we divide, we have divisions, and we start to take different tangents on the teaching as the time goes past from the founders. There was a lot of discrimination, casteism, and gender inequality in India, especially. So what he wanted to do was spread that message of equality and equalness between all humans, and the message of goodness, to go and help another person and stand up, even if it means putting yourself in danger and standing up for something that's right. So for me, Guru Nanak stands out quite a lot because of the hard work and having traveled on foot for so long, having to leave his family, but for the bigger purpose of creating this world movement of Sikhs. And the meaning of Sikh is actually student of truth. So before things became a formalized religion, it was mainly a way of life, really. And to date, the Sikh teachings are pretty much universal, and it's a way of life that anybody can incorporate into their life to improve themselves and become that positive sort of force. And there's a number of other gurus. There's a lot. I mean, we've even had 2 gurus who were tortured and killed for standing up for righteousness. So the Sikh history, even though we're not such a old religion in comparison to the established ones, there's a lot of rich history there of sacrifice, of standing up for right purposes, and making difficult decisions and being resilient. So for me, as a Sikh, this is what I try to incorporate into my life and sort of my evolution of this life and learning and bringing that into my actions, really.
Absolutely. So that ties right into my next question, which is historically, the Sikhi are known for having a very strong sense of justice. Like you mentioned the Langar service, which gives food to people in need, but it also directly protests caste-based discrimination by having everybody sit down together to share food. And then there's one of my other guests, the nonprofit, the Sikh Coalition, which is based in the US, and they protect religious freedom and fight hate crimes. And your podcast itself tackles a lot of major issues like mental health, domestic violence, racism. And what aspects of Sikhism do you think have contributed to this historic sense of justice, this rich history?
So I think, again, it's not only just the Sikh teachings that we refer to, which explain to us, like so after the 10 gurus, the scriptures were evolved through the 10 gurus, and they're a collation of not just work by Sikh gurus, but from a wider space, from different people, from different faiths, different backgrounds, different castes. So it was an inclusive scripture with a key message, and it was also bringing in messages before Guru Nanak by other saints, and combining that into a volume called the Guru Granth Sahib Ji, which is our present guru. So we get guidance from that, and that in itself refers to metaphor, stories, and coming from a sort of the Eastern culture is very dependent on stories, and this is what resonates with us. The scriptures themselves are meant to be sung in different musical measures, so they align to the message, and some of these are quite energetic, powerful sort of rhythms that talk about justice and sort of truth prevailing over sort of the opposition of evil and things like that. So I think there's a rich embedded daily, monthly, yearly culture where certain events, certain scriptures are sung and people are reminded of the sacrifices that the gurus made and others as well. And that gives us a sense of living for a purpose beyond ourselves. And we've seen time and time again that there's been a lot of sacrifices in the Sikh community and the gurus themselves. And in our participation in the World War I and II, we contributed very much for a minority. So I think that is always embedded in everything we do. And the purpose of the journey for a Sikh is to continue to learn and reflect and fight the injustices in all aspects. So whether that's to do with poverty alleviation, whether that's standing up for somebody's rights, back in the day, the emphasis was to protect other communities, and if that meant we had to go to war, we went to war, and that was physical contact. So there was an emphasis on martial arts and being an aspect of a saint soldier, which was a key thing, which is the Khalsa, which I think we'll probably touch on a bit later. But the premise of that was already from day one. Guru Nanak stood up and talked out aloud against the barbarianism that was happening by the current king at that time, and they were just killing and looting and raping. And he was boldly talking out against that. Whereas at that time, you could just be killed for talking out. So from the first guru to the 10th, we've had exemplar examples of standing up for rights and living a purposeful life beyond your own, and then contributing to the betterment of others. And the ninth guru themselves was killed for standing up for Kashmiri Pandits who reached out to him because they were being forced to convert their faith and not practice their existing faith. And then he stood up and went to visit the king and got tortured and killed for that as well.
So one of your episodes talks about Khalsa Spirit. So could you tell us a little bit more about the Khalsa Brotherhood and what that means to you?
Sure. I think the context, the thing in the current times, that things evolve and change, and words mean different things. I think especially in today's world, like saying brotherhood almost feels like it's just for the men, for the brothers. But I think we just haven't found the right word that actually makes it more of like a group of people, a social movement as such, which is what the Khalsa is. So we found after Guru Arjan was killed and tortured by the then king for not accepting to change the scriptures because they weren't agreeing with certain parts of it, which referred to Islam. And then that was the first time the Sikhs had somebody who was their guru and they'd been killed. And prior to that, it was a very peaceful movement, that they weren't armed, there was any martial need for that part. The sixth guru, then Guru Hargobind, set up to change that because he realized that the environment was very hostile and the Sikhs would not survive and we would not be able to help others either if we were not stronger ourselves. So then he called for horses, weapons rather than money, and established an army, martial arts martial presence for the Sikh community. And we then stood the ground because we were equipped to do so, but with the spiritual foundation that what actions we're taking is for the betterment of others in society. And that kind of progressed and kept going. But what Guru Gobind Singh Ji did, our 10th Guru, after his father was killed for those reasons mentioned earlier, he realized there needs to be something more formal than that. And then he created on Vaisakhi, which is coming up next week actually. So 14th of April was a very special day for Sikhs because that's when the Khalsa Brotherhood was established. It was a day in India when he called for a mass gathering and he asked for a head. And that meant somebody giving his life for him. But it was a test. And so he got 5 volunteers and they stood up and said, I'm ready to give my head. Took him into a tent and people thought that they were beheaded and stuff like that. But it was a test to show how brave the Sikhs were. And so those 5 were called the 5 beloved, and they were the first ones to become Khalsa, because in that tent, he put a uniform on them, they were wearing turbans, they were armed, and they had to wear the 5 Ks, which is a 5 sort of identifying factors for Sikhs to be called Khalsa. And he mandated them to live according to very high principles and underpinned by the Sikh scriptures. And so that became the formalization of that soldier appearance. And it was almost like any other uniform you get. A policeman wears a uniform, they're held to a certain regard. They have to follow a certain level of rules. And society knows that that's a policeman. So society then knew that this is a Khalsa. I can go to them and I can spot them from a crowd of 100,000 people. And I know that I can depend on them. They will stand up for me and they will do their utmost best to help me. So there became this responsibility that the Khalsa then owned, to live to a high moral standard, to live a very humble life, a very simple life, full of virtues and looking to improve yourself constantly and helping others and being ready to give your life for a just cause. So that Khalsa brotherhood almost underpins a lot of these things that we do in today's society as Sikhs. Not everybody is a baptized Sikh, and that's not the premise. Is that still we celebrate the Khalsa, we celebrate the reason for it, and we practice it in some way or form in today's world.
Absolutely. And that definitely reminds me of the whole idea behind Kirpan, because a lot of people see that and they're just like, oh, it's a dagger, and they think you go around stabbing people like you're Michael Myers or something. But someone told me that the Kirpan means mercy, but it's about being able to protect people who might not be able to protect themselves. And this is kind of a tangent, but there was a story that I like to tell people who get judgmental of the Sikhi for that. So this man was a friend of mine, and he gave me a lot of advice when I was starting my show, and he was also a Sikhi, and he told me the story about how this was a famous event in the US, but there was a man who went into a gurdwara with a rifle and he started shooting at everybody, and his goal was to kill everyone inside the gurdwara, and that included the elderly and the children. But the leader of the gurdwara went over to him and he pulled out his kirpan and he just repeatedly stabbed the shooter until he was dead. But unfortunately, in the meaning of the fight, he had been shot several times. So both him and the shooter died. However, everybody else, save for 3 people who were shot when the shooter entered, survived. So
Yeah.
he saved all those people by doing what he did.
Yeah. Those are very unfortunate events. I remember when those happened quite vividly, actually. It sent kind of shockwaves through the whole community. And I think one of my close friends, he describes it as, the Sikh faith looks, if you took a Sikh and looked at them, you would think it's very old school and historic and relic. Whereas actually the teachings are completely the opposite. They're really relevant. They're really positive. They're there to make you an upstanding citizen, a role model as such, for anywhere that you represent in the world. And it's unfortunate that there's a mixed message that people judge by looking and misunderstand the Quran, the context of it. And the Quran is a daily reminder to us to say you have a moral duty to stand up, to protect yourself and to protect others. And it's that mercy aspect that balances you out to understand that you're not using it to scare people or do what typically people would do with a weapon, is to take advantage of people. But yeah, it's unfortunate. I think it almost feels that Sikhi is we've probably not been the best at marketing ourselves. And I think that's why there's a lot of US groups out there who've been doing a much more concerted effort over the last few years. I think the Sikh Coalition is one of those organizations have been doing these marketing campaigns, because in America, unfortunately, there's been a lot of these cases since 9/11, and they continue to happen, but it's the education piece that's missing. For people who get it, they get it because they've either met a Sikh or they've had to sort of read about it, but others, they don't really know. They literally just don't know who they are or what they represent, and they just go by face value and discriminate based on your looks, which is a turban and a beard, which unfortunately is associated to the typical thought that everyone thinks is the suicide bomber or such. But my analogy is always like, we couldn't be far from that. We couldn't be far from that, because almost a suicide bomber is using that as a technique to cause mass destruction and giving their life for it. Whereas we're at the opposite scale of it. We're willing to give our life to protect the most amount of people that we're able to protect, just like that situation you talked of. That one person took that action to protect many more than themselves. So, there's a bit of education piece there for people out there.
Absolutely. So, on the lighter side, do you have a favorite episode of your podcast, like one you really enjoyed making or are especially proud of?
I think I've been quite lucky to have really good guests, and every topic has been different and every organization has been different. So I kind of try to create a non-judgmental space. So I veer off the path of typical religious discourses, because everyone has their own opinions on that stuff. I focus on the bits around what are people out there doing to help the community. So the South Asian community don't really focus much on mental health, nor the language really helps to talk about it, because there's very limited languages in the Punjabi language to talk about mental health. There's a couple of efforts being done over the last year or so to decipher that, but they would just, turn around and say people are mad. That's the alternative, rather than understanding what mental health is, what it means, what different needs of it. So I think having been able to have mental health organizations on there has been really great to sort of dampen the thing the thing that stops people from normalizing these conversations. So it's almost like normalizing that into a day-to-day conversation that people can have and relate to. It was really good. And one around domestic violence as well. I think a lot of people in a number of communities, women suffer because of violent partners or taking domestic violence. I've seen that firsthand growing up, seeing my mother experience that. So for me, that was a chosen topic. So I think that the good thing about podcasting is not about favorites, it's about I get to reach out and choose topics that might resonate with me, but I definitely know that they need to be talked more of, and then give that platform to do that. So I think being podcasters, and you probably resonate with this as well, it's a learning exercise for us as much as we're asking questions to the guests, because you are learning on that interview, and they're giving you the insights, and you're able to sort of articulate questions that your guests might want to ask, but also questions that you have a burning desire to ask them as well.
Absolutely. So, in what ways did you use prayer in your faith as a Sikhi? And do you have any prayers you want to share with our audience today?
So I think my journey to Sikhi, even though I was born in a Sikh family, I didn't understand the Sikh faith. It was kind of like one of those things when you're born in an household, you don't really engage with it because it's just there. You tend the Gurdwara, you tend the prayers, unless somebody in your family is very into it and they understand it, they can explain it to you. But unfortunately, mine was like many others. They just knew just the things that they did was the things they did, and very limited experience of the understanding of Sikhi. So when I grew older, I kind of adopted the faith for my purpose. When I was in my 20s, late in the latter parts of my university study, I started to research, started to understand for myself what it was all about. And I had to go through that learning curve of going beyond what was just there as face value, and go to the scriptures themselves, understand and learn the language again properly, and decipher the messages. And for me, prayer has changed a lot. So what I started off was thinking prayer was me doing 5 sets of prayers a day and keeping that as a routine. I didn't really understand the prayers, just hoping that they would do something, like it's a thing. To then start to take a step back away. And the way I did it was, right, so the Guru Granth Sahib Ji is like 1430 or 30 pages. It's a volume, it's a big volume, right? And so just as we go to university or any educational institute, our lecturers aren't going to say, you must know this from day one. So just read it, you'll get it. It's kind of bite-sized, compartmentalized learning, case studies and referencing and discussions and debate. And it's meant to be something that you digest at your pace and really understand it and articulate it and discuss it. And different parts of your life is going to be different because those messages resonate at different stages. So for me, practicing my prayers nowadays is more about really understanding what this one line means, or what does this one shabad mean. Shabad is like a hymn, so there's a theme, and there's even the beauty of the Sikh scriptures is it actually has pause. It has the word pause, rahau, in nearly all the shabads, and like that means stop, contemplate, think before you go ahead. But culturally, as a community, we're like, we carry on, we carry on, we carry on, we carry on, we carry on. Like we've got to read this all within an hour. So I think for more is me being reflective. But I think the one thing I would share with the listeners is like there's one line in our daily prayers which says Dukh Daru Sukh Rog Pya. And Dukh means pain and Daru means medicine. So the old school form of like Daru can mean alcohol, but in this perspective, it means like medicinal use of that. So most medicines were based on alcohol basis. So it says Dukh Daru, which means pain is your medicine, right? And then the second part says Sukh Rog Pya. Sukh means pleasure, happiness. Rog means disease. That basically your pains are your medicine and your pleasures are your pain. And it quite blows your mind. It's like, why would the guru say that? You know, isn't it meant to be the opposite? We're praying for like pleasure all the time, for good times, for positivity. And what it is the deciphering of that means that without resilience in your life, you will not become stronger. You will become weaker. So the more pleasures you have, the more comforts you have, when those pleasures and comforts are taken away, you are in pain because you've got dependent on these pleasures. So it's almost like a bit of gratitude, a bit of humbleness, living a humble life. So if you want to, so I always try to relate this to a real life situation on a daily basis. If I go to have a shower and the water, the boiler breaks and the water's cold, I'm used to nice warm showers every morning. And suddenly I've got cold water. I'm going to be distressed. How am I supposed to get on with my day? I can't have my hot shower for the day. I can't go in the cold shower and appreciate that. So if you're taking that as face value, if you're taking a cold shower every now and then, which is actually really beneficial for your health, you get used to that. You don't get used to the hot, but you appreciate the cold showers as well. So suddenly my boiler breaks tomorrow. I'm like, fine. It's a cold shower day. It doesn't change me. I carry on. It's made me more resilient. So even just taking that one line, you can apply that in so many instances that everything, maybe having a car, you know, it's a pleasure that we means we walk less, so our health suffers. Like how many applications of that one line in that scripture is applicable to life? And it's like I read somewhere, it's probably on social media. It says basically, if there was no wind, all the trees would rake, and because the wind strengthens the trees, the roots. Without resistance, the tree cannot be strong and sturdy and last as long as it can and bear fruit. So just as we are a tree, we need resistance in our life. And I think life will throw curveballs at you. That resistance we can't control. It's out of our control. But there's another set of resistance that we can control. So for example, you are studying in university. It's not easy. It's a difficult thing. But you choose to commit to it. You know, you do your study, you follow the program. After 2-3 years, you've gained the knowledge, you've progressed. Others may think, oh, I want to play games and watch Netflix all the time. That's the opportunity cost, isn't it? So what they gained, they watch Netflix, but they haven't done the other thing. So it's what do you choose in life? Choose your own resistance, because there's an element of that, and you can be the owner of that. And then the more conscious you are of owning your own resistance, you are then more ready to take on life's resistance when it turns up and faces you in the face. That's probably the one sort of example of a prayer that I would want to share.
Is there anything else you would like to talk about on the show today?
I suppose it's, what is your feeling from having conversations with many people on different faiths and thoughts on, you know, what are similarities that you see through guests and conversations? Because I'm part of an interfaith discussion group, and we bring together many people of different faiths together on a regular basis to talk about things like conflict. What does it mean? What does your scripture say? What does it mean? And what I always see is that there's more in common that bring us together. But what society does, it focuses on the things that divide us, and that's what kind of sticks in people's brains. So what is your experience of conversations?
I mean, I have to agree. When you were talking about pain is your medicine, pleasure is your disease, it reminded me of Tendikyo principles. It's sort of similar, and it talks about this metaphor of carrying a bundle of logs on your back, giving you balance. But really, it's like if you had a life that was easy and didn't give you any troubles, you would behave recklessly and you might not be that good of a person because you never learned to appreciate anything. You know, you just took the world as it was and never realized you were fortunate, you know? And that's sort of like their response to people with chronic illnesses is that it's a part of life, but you learn how to manage it day by day. So it really reminded me of that. And there is a lot of overlap between different religions because a lot of them have an emphasis on community and helping people out. Like Sarvasti Abbey, which is Buddhist, they were guests on my show, and they're a co-ed monastery, and they have prison dharma. So they go into prisons and teach the dharma to people who want to hear that, and they help prisoners get back on the right track once they're released from prison. And they also provide shelter to people who need it, especially young people who may be displaced for various reasons. Or there's another place near me, actually, one of my earliest guests was a rabbi who helps guard a mosque while the people are praying in there to make sure everyone stays safe. So, I mean, to me, that's what stands out the most, though. Even though they might have different beliefs, you're still a person and you still have feelings, and there's still more in common than there is that's different. Like,
Yes. Yeah, 100%. I think I agree with that. There's so much we have in common because first we are humans, then we are our faith. You see what I mean? Like that comes second because we're all born, we all have to face the same troubles growing up. You know, as being a parent now, I suppose it's more like for me, I'm always looking at ways to break the cycle. So if there's things that you know, through my family lineage that we've consistently, I can see the pattern going back, that we've made mistakes or certain things that we are more susceptible to. I want to be the chain breaker because I want to give my son a fresh view of that and let him navigate life, or, you know, give him the chances to become resilient rather than trying to control so much around him, letting him be free of thought, letting him ask me challenging questions rather than shutting him down because I don't know them. You know, the opposite view of people who are maybe insecure and they don't know the answers is always, you know, you're too young to ask that question, or who do you think you are? I think there's always a different path you can take, which is, right, let's investigate the answers. Let's do it together. Let's see what the main thoughts are. And let's have a healthy discussion. And I think this is the big thing that's typically missing in society. We're too busy convincing other people from right and wrong, rather than saying, actually, can we just have a debate about this, like a very neutral debate, and see what the pros and cons are? And we can be bygones, because we might not ever decide on that, but we might actually get 50% of the way because you agree that this is that, and then the rest is like you'll feel still 50% further than you were by being 100% completely divided. Well, I think there is something about I truly believe that religion is a framework. It's a framework in the absence of a rigorous structure in society. Whereas we live in a world now which is changing and evolving. Government structures, policies are evolved, so advanced. And, you know, in the days when religion was set up, there needs to be a framework which is able to bring masses to do goodness in the world, to alleviate the negatives, because we will always have this ongoing battle with yin yang. We need it. It's like there's another a line in our prayers that we do every evening, and it says, you know, that we are in this constant play of day and night, and the day and night means, you know, to appreciate night you have to have daylight. To appreciate daylight you have to have night. To appreciate pleasure you've got to have pain. If you have pain, your pleasure. So you will never be absent of the opposite. So a utopia where people feel that we will ever get to a utopia where everything is hunky-dory, it'll be boring because we won't like it because there will be no motivation for you to go and do positive things because that isn't there. So it's a natural phenomenon, but you want to tip the scale to more positivity than negativity. And in certain instances, you're going to need more of that. And I feel like messengers of faith bring that to society at the relevant times. And I think it's the core essence that we should focus on, because the world changes, but there's core essences about goodness and humanity, looking after each other, treating each other as human beings, non-discrimination, equality, and fairness are stuff that we all resonate with every single path that we follow.
Absolutely. Thank you again for being on the show today.
Brilliant. No, it's been a pleasure being on this podcast, and I wish you only go from strength to strength with this. And yeah, well done, because I know there's a lot of work that goes into the background of creating a podcast, getting it running, and doing it on top of day jobs, and you're obviously studying university, which takes up a lot of time and resource. So hats off to you as well, Sarah. Thank you.
Thank you.